Hey everybody, it's Peter, and this is the 2025 Ninja 1100 SX, but the SE model. This is a model that was not available on the Ninja 1000, but it is now available for 2025 on the 1100. So this again is the upgraded Ninja 1000, a little bit more displacement. We'll talk about how that plays out on this bike. I've done the video of the regular Ninja 1100 SX already, but the SE model adds a few things, the biggest things being suspension and brakes. But we're going to go through this bike because it talks about some advancements and other kinds of things. We're going to talk about what this bike has and why I think it's still the king of sport tourers, and you can agree or disagree with me after I make my case. So of course I'm filming here at Jim Gilbert's Wheels and Deals, Jim Gilbert's Power Sports. This is the #1 volume Kawasaki dealer in the country, so they give me complete access to everything they sell, which is why I can give you this. And if you have questions about it, we can come back to things like this. So what we're going to do in this one is go through the details, because a lot of people will think, oh, there's some things that are unchanged, but it really in this class is still among a class leaders. Now you can debate which type of sport tourer you want, whether you want a different style, whether you want maximum horsepower, or if you want a complete package. And I think in my mind, let's get my biases right out there, this is the best complete package in the traditional sport touring environment, not that sort of raised up adventure touring kind of market. So what we're going to do is go through the bits piece by piece. Let's start with the front wheel. So if you've seen my videos before, you know I love to start with the front wheel because you can see the manufacturer's intent for the bike, and that's exactly the case here. So what you have here is the Bridgestone Battle Axe Hypersport S23s. Now the rumor is that the S22s were developed for the Ninja 1000. So the S23s are the step up, a little bit better wet grip, a little bit better overall durability and that kind of thing, but a great tire for this bike. And then, of course, you start seeing some of the SE things on this bike. So you've got the Showa suspension, which is the same as the regular 1100. It's fully adjustable, but right here is the big difference. And this is something I actually complained about a year ago when I reviewed the Ninja 1000. This now has Brembo brakes. Now, you used to have the radial mount calipers in the past, but it wasn't Brembo brakes. And in my mind, the Ninja 1000 SX should be the pinnacle of the sport touring bikes when you don't include superchargers and you don't include, like in Kawasaki's lineup, when you don't include the supercharged bikes and you don't include the race bikes. Like, this is in its class, this is supposed to be the top one, but on the Z900 and the Z900 RS, the SE models of those had Brembo brakes where this did not. So this is a real upgrade because now you don't end up with anything but premium features. It used to be you could buy the Z900 SE and get better suspension and better brakes than this model, but this one had better everything else. Now they've upgraded the Z900. We're going to do that video next, so you'll see that very soon. But you can't get anything better on the Z900 than you can on this, sort of. There is a new dash package in there, but really as far as rideability, you're now ending up with the top brake package, the top suspension package, and the Brembo brakes are not just Brembo brakes, you've got the braided lines in here, so you've got it done right. A lot of bike companies will put Brembo brakes on there so you have the name, but they don't do it right. Part of the Brembo brakes is the feel. And of course, a lot of people are, you can take this to the racetrack and you can, run these from high speeds down to low speeds very quickly, again and again and again, and you don't have any fade. But for most people riding in most environments, the real benefit of Brembo brakes is the feel, and you need those braided lines to give you that feel. So they've done this right, and that's really the story with this entire bike. They've done it right. Now, some people will argue with it when we get to the engine, so let's talk about that engine now. So taking a look at the engine of this bike, this is really one of the big changes. At least this is the change that people are going to hear about, but in my mind, it's not such a big change. This is essentially the same engine we had before. It used to be a 1043, so the Ninja 1000 was actually almost 1050. So it used to be a 1043 or 1043 cc. Now it's 1099. So they did the same thing on this bike as they did on the Ninja 400 to make it a 500. On that bike, they went from Ninja 400, which was 399 cc. They brought up to 451, and they called it a 500. On this one, it was always overrated. They called it 1000, even though it was 1043. And now it's 1099. So all they did was make the cylinders travel just a minuscule bit further. So you've got a lot of the same components. There are some upgraded components in there, but a lot of the same things. So basically reliability should be untouched because you've basically got all the components that made the last bike super reliable. Now the controversy is that peak horsepower is down. They say emissions are better and fuel efficiency is better. So let's talk about that engine right now and talk about why I think for this bike, that's the right move. So if you think I'm going to apologize for Kawasaki for lowering the horsepower, I'm not. I think I understand why they did it, and I think I understand why people would be upset about that. But when you look at who buys this bike, I actually think it kind of makes sense. First of all, four-cylinder bikes worldwide are having a lot of trouble meeting emission standards, so you're going to see reduced power on more and more four-cylinder bikes as they move into tougher and tougher emission standards. That's why they did it. But by increasing the displacement of the bike, they were actually able to increase the torque significantly and broaden the torque curve of what was already a strong torque curve. And when you compare this to, for instance, the Suzuki competitor, the GSX 1000, GSX-R, you know what I mean, the direct competitor to this in Suzuki's lineup, the Suzuki always made a hair more peak horsepower, but everywhere in the rev range, so at 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, all those RPMs, this one made more horsepower at any RPM than that one anyways. So it already had broad horsepower where these riders are going to use it. The only time that very peak horsepower would matter for most people on a bike of this engine size is on a racetrack, and that's not what Kawasaki sells this for. This is a road bike that could do a track day for sure, but for most people, and even on the track, it's not going to matter that much, because when you have a bike of this much displacement, you're probably not going to be reaching the very peak of power. So what they did is they broadened the power in the market that this bike is built for by having more torque through that larger engine, still meeting emission standards, and having more horsepower than you would ever need on the street. So what that means is if you full throttle this and reach the peak RPM or peak horsepower RPM, yes, it will make a tiny bit less horsepower at that specific RPM if you're there. Now, at any gear, you're probably well beyond speed limits at that point. Certainly a second gear and beyond, you're well beyond any speed limits. So by making it more torquey, what that does is make it imminently more drivable for a bike that was already great on the streets anyways. So while I don't love that the peak horsepower is down, I do think it makes no difference to the target market of this, and because they've increased the torque throughout the rev range, you end up with something that is already better and will feel and actually be more powerful for all of your everyday kind of driving, including sport touring at, you know, good speeds. So I'm kind of okay with it because of what this bike is. If they had a ZX-10 and they took the horsepower down, well, then it becomes a little harder for me to justify, because that's a bike where it's all about that peak horsepower at the top of the RPM. This one has that torque everywhere, and that's what's always been fun about this bike, and now it's stronger. So the other big enhancement, and this is an enhancement and it does explain extra cost, although this bike has dropped in cost, at least the base bike, which directly compares with the previous Ninja 1000, has actually dropped in price. So you've got a price that's lower on the overall bike in the 1100 than the Ninja 1000, but then they've of course added this trim line. Now, this is the big difference, the Ohlins suspension. I think this is the difference that most people are going to feel. Most people aren't going to, other than the brake feel, most people aren't going to feel the benefits of the Brembos over the other quality brakes that were on the Ninja 1000. But this is something that I think people will feel. The Ohlins suspension is a big upgrade. I've had it on my Z900 RS, and I can tell you that when you lean that bike over and go around a rough corner, even on my Z900 RS that didn't have great tires like this one does, you really feel confident in a corner. And if you think about it, on a car, the suspension has to react up and down only, right? That's the way your wheels are oriented. But as you lean a bike over, the bumps are still up and down. They're not leaned. So the bumps are up and down, and your bike is lean, which means you have to have a really precise control, and the Ohlins suspension is fantastic for that. You have the preload adjuster. You had a preload adjuster in the past as well, but now you've got fully adjustable Ohlins suspension. So while a lot of people will say, oh, you know, it's just a different shock, it's not a big deal, it is something that makes a difference to sport riders, and this thing is very capable as a sport riding machine, because it also, in addition to having great tires, great suspension, great brakes, it also has a number of electronics that will keep you in control. So let's go over some of those electronics again that complement this suspension. So one of the keys to this bike is it's got a big powerful engine, but compared to like a regular racing sport bike, this thing is very easy to drive. Now again, it's not a beginner bike. It's got way more power than a beginner should have, at least in my opinion, and probably in a lot of a biker's opinions. But this is a bike that makes you a better rider once you have those basic skills in place, and this one just enhances on that. So let's talk about some of the quick electronics. First of all, you have an IMU, inertial management unit. So what that does is it can sense when the bike is diving. It can sense when the bike is raising its front wheel. It can sense when the rear wheel is slipping out. The front wheel might be slipping out. All of those things are sensed all the time. It can sense any which way the bike is moving, and then it can adapt various electronics to help you keep control. So one of those cool things is Kawasaki Corner Management Function, KCMF. I gotta look at the cheat sheet to get all these acronyms in place. But what that does is it can sense not just your actual braking, it can sense the engine braking, the engine RPM, the sort of G-forces, the angle, all that kind of stuff, and it can adapt how it goes into a corner by just tweaking little things in the electronics. So what that means is you can choose the line you want and the bike will work with you to stay in that line. It's one of those things that's kind of imperceptible to you while you're riding the bike, but you'll know on this bike that you can choose a line and maintain that line everywhere you go. This bike's all about precision and handling and you know, kind of delivering everything at the top notch for the rider, and that's one of the key pieces. You also have Kawasaki Intelligent Anti-Lock Brake System. What that means is it can again sense engine braking, it can use that IMU to sense a bunch of different things and adapt its ABS. It can have quicker pulses, it can have different style pulses, again, to make it less intrusive for you, but also help you to keep that line, to keep that braking in place. It has cornering ABS, of course, as well. It can sense all of that. You can choose your power mode. So if you want to go low power, high power, you can do that. It's got riding modes, which I'll show you in a second. The cruise controls on this, some of the electronics. They've optimized the gear ratios this year. So that's not an electronic thing, but we talked about that to give you better fuel efficiency. Again, this is a tour. Once you get out on the highway, it's got all the torque and power. And by changing the gear ratio and adding torque, you really don't lose any passing power in the top gear. A lot of times if you broaden that top gear, you have to shift down or you'll have less passing power, but by expanding the torque curve and then changing that top gear to a higher gear, you're gonna get better fuel efficiency, you're not gonna run the engine as hard, but you're still gonna have all that passing power. So all of those things make you a better rider as well. What else do they do? Put the tires on. They've got other things that we'll show you as we get to the dash, and of course the Ohlins suspension. They do talk about in the dash a 4-way adjustable windshield. I just want to point out that I can only figure out 2 ways on it, or maybe 4 clicks, but it says 4-way adjustable. If 4-way means 1, 2, 3, 4, then yes, it's 4-way, but it's 4 position, not 4-way, just so we know that. All right, let's take a look at some of the dash and electronics that you actually work with and not the stuff that you don't see, and talk about what this bike has. So we're going to take a look at the dash in a second. I do want to show you one little piece that is a good thing and an okay thing. So the good thing is this is a USB-C port. Now they put this sort of Kawasaki accessory on a number of models, right? From the Eliminator has it as an option on the top trim line, and this is also as an accessory, or I say option, it's a built-in piece on this SE model as well. Now I believe you can add that through Kawasaki's accessories to other bikes. It's just sort of bolted on here. It is kind of add-on. I'd like to see it sort of built into the dash. I mean, you have a spot there, you can put a 12-volt port. There's just a sort of dummy switch there. I'd like to see it added to the dash, but you know, at least it's added. In fairness to them, if you were to put a quad lock somewhere on here, you could just sort of run your wire across and it's all on the handlebars, which is all moving together. But at least it's there. It is something that's added to the SE model here. Let's take a look at the dash now. We're gonna film this all in one shot, so we'll zoom in here. Sorry for my camera work. Turning the dash on, I wanna point out that the clarity that you see is nowhere near as clear as what I see. Just the way the camera catches these dashes. For instance, I can read the tach perfectly clear, just over 10,000 RPM. You can't read it perfectly clear on your screen. All right, top beside the neutral, you've got rain mode is what we're in right now. I'm gonna hold down the button. You can cycle through the drive modes. You've got rain, you've got road, and you've got sport mode. So this one does not have a custom mode. You will see that on the new Z900 with an entirely different dash and a 5-inch screen. So although this has stepped up in the rider availability for or rider stuff as far as Brembo brakes and the Ohlins suspension, the Z900 now does have a slightly different electronic suite and a larger screen, so it's still kind of pushing that limit of which one is the top dog depending on what you look at. But as far as a you know, handling, electronics, engine, braking, suspension, you're matching that bike in every way, of course exceeding it in the engine department. All right, looking down here, just a couple little things. You've got the trip A right there. Hopefully you can see that. We can cycle through that. We've got trip B. We've got the lean angle in a bar graph. So that green angle is just on the side stand. You can sort of see a live, that bar graph moves left and right live as you lean it left and right. Then you have max lean. This is much safer to look at. You don't want to be in an angle in a corner looking at that bar graph move. You want to be looking where you're going, but this one tells you your max lean angle, so it's gone 21 degrees to the left, 22 degrees to the right on this bike so far. Got 1 kilometer on it, and of course back to trip A. Now the bottom you can switch through as well. It's currently on range. You've got average speed, you've got total time, you've got the battery voltage, you've got kilometers per liter, which can be liters per 100 kilometers. It can be miles per gallon US, miles per gallon UK, lots of options there. So that was instant, and then average is what we're at now. And then you've got back to the range. You've permanently got the engine temperature and the coolant temperature and the thermometer. Now that thermometer I would think is not bang on. It's warmer than 15 degrees in here, so that's something you'd have to sort of adapt to there, or maybe it can be tweaked and set. Also a permanent clock there as well. So nice dash, kind of familiar to the Ninja 1000 people. It gives you everything you need and nothing you don't. And again, much clearer to read in person. So let's talk about who this bike is for now that it's an 1100 instead of a 1000cc, which was 1043. You're going to see people in the comments that didn't make it this far that are all upset because this has lost horsepower and they've stopped watching and that's it. And this bike isn't for them. They are the people who comment on the YouTube but don't actually shop for this bike and buy this bike. This is a bike that has more power than you would ever need for the street. And really what Kawasaki has done, including meeting those emission standards, has put it into a position where it's more drivable. You keep all the electronics that make it really precise. You add a suspension that makes it more precise. You add braking that makes it more precise. And it really is a better bike. And if you can swing it, there's no real reason to get the non-SE model. The Ohlins suspension is something you're going to feel unless you're not really a precise kind of rider. Maybe you just want something with the power and that's all you want. But to get the upgrade with the Brembo and the Ohlins, to me, is worth it. And I say that as someone who bought a bike with the upgrade to the Brembo and the Ohlins as well. One thing I do feel like with this bike though is it's kind of incomplete without the luggage. So this one has the option for a top box or side bags. This particular bike cannot have all three, not the side bags and the top box. Don't know why, that's just what Kawasaki has done. The Versys can have all three. So Versys shares an engine with this, it can have all three. It shares a lot of technology as well. But to me, what I would do is add the side bags on and make this into a true tourer. It feels almost incomplete without that, but of course that does make it less expensive to buy. We should point out the SE model was not available before, but this SX 1000 SX or 1100 SX now has dropped in price from last year, so it's both more affordable, and now you have a trim line with extra things, and of course you get those bags put on and you are set up to do all kinds of tours on this thing. And if you want to take it to a track, you can do that and, you know, have some fun with it. So why do I think it's still among the leaders? Well, again, I don't view this class, once you get to a certain amount of horsepower in this class, there comes a point where you can't use anymore anyways. And the precision, the smoothness, everything that this does, including its up, down, quick shifter and all that, makes it a really easy bike to drive quickly and on long distances. And it's just one of those things where it just feels a class above a lot of other bikes, especially in its price range. So still one of my all-time favorite bikes, even with the upgrades. They haven't changed it to far from the heart of what it is, and I still think it's, if not the class leader, certainly among the class leaders. If you're looking at anything in this class of bike, you have to give this one a serious look because it's just very, very, very good still. So there's my review of the Ninja 1100 SX SE. I'm gonna go film the new 2025 Z900 next, so that video will be coming up soon, and that bike is also interesting because it's similar class to this, a little bit different, but it also has a number of features that this one doesn't electronically, and it's upgraded to things like cruise control and IMU and all those kinds of things that they never had before. So it kind of narrows the gap between these two, and it is a bike that if you're considering this one, you should at least be aware of the Z900. So we'll do that next, and we'll talk to you in the next one. Thanks everybody for watching.